Medal of Honor. Recipients, the Civil War crew of USS Agawam. It was a mission doomed to fail, yet 9 men still stepped forward. 9 men who knew they might not return. 9 men who turned a disastrous plan into a story of undeniable courage. This is the forgotten tale of the USS Agawam's crew, and the medals of honor they earned in fire and fury. The birth of a medal and a war-torn nation. The Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration, was born from the flames of the Civil War. The country was at war with itself, and in the chaos, acts of heroism stood out like beacons of light. By the war's end, 1,525 of these newly minted medals would be awarded. But today, we focus on just 9 brave sailors who changed history aboard the USS Agawam. Their mission, a daring plan that, in theory, could have wiped out a crucial Confederate stronghold. In reality, it turned into a nightmarish failure. But their bravery, that's what earned them the nation's highest honor. Fort Fisher, the last Confederate lifeline. For most of the Civil War, Fort Fisher remained untouched. A massive fortress-like defense protecting Wilmington, North Carolina, the Confederacy's last Atlantic port. It was their final lifeline to the world, and the Union knew it had to go. By late 1864, the North was ready to strike. The plan? Unleash hell on Fort Fisher, a massive assault by land and sea. But first, they had one crazy idea: blow up a ship packed with explosives, right next to the fort. Sounds brilliant, right? In theory, this massive explosion would flatten part of the fort, or at least disable its heavy artillery. That would make the ground assault much easier. And that's where the USS Agawam's crew comes in. The suicide mission, USS Louisiana's deadly cargo. There was just one problem. The Agawam itself was under repair, so its crew was reassigned to another ship, an old, worn-out steamer named the USS Louisiana. Their job? Load it with explosives. A lot of explosives. They turned the Louisiana into a floating time bomb, rigging it with a complex fuse and clockwork system. Then, they set sail straight for Fort Fisher. It was December 23rd, 1864. Christmas was 2 days away. But there was no peace on Earth that night. Late that evening, under the cover of darkness, the USS Wilderness towed the Louisiana into position, just 200 yards from Fort Fisher's beach, close enough for absolute devastation. The Agawam's men set the fuses, lit fires in the propeller shaft, and dropped anchor, making sure the doomed ship wouldn't drift away. Then, in a small boat, they escaped, watching their death trap drift closer to the fort. They didn't know if they'd live to see the next morning, but they had done their job. Then, they waited. Failure in fire and smoke. For nearly 2 hours, silence. Then, boom! The Louisiana erupted into a monstrous explosion, shaking the ocean and lighting up the night sky. Fire roared into the air. A cloud of smoke rolled across the waves. And then, nothing. The fort still stood. The guns still pointed toward the sea. The massive blast had completely missed its mark. Instead of obliterating Fort Fisher, the explosion only confirmed what the Confederates already suspected. An attack was coming. The element of surprise was gone. What was meant to be a game-changing moment had become a colossal failure. Heroes in the face of defeat. The Union launched their first assault on Fort Fisher the next day, but without the expected damage from the Louisiana's explosion, the Confederates held strong. The battle was a disaster for the Union. They were forced to retreat. But amid that failure, something remarkable happened. 9 men, 9 ordinary sailors who had signed up for what could have been a suicide mission, stood out. They had volunteered, knowing the risks. They had faced the unknown and did their duty without hesitation. And for that, they were awarded the Medal of Honor. The 9 Medal of Honor recipients. These men were more than just names in a history book. They were brave souls who dared to face the impossible. Gunner's Mate, Charles Bibber, Seaman: Dennis Conlon. Boatswain's mate: William Garvin. Boatswain's mate: Charles Hawkins. Fireman: Second class: William Hinnigan. Captain of the Afterguard: Robert Montgomery. Master-at-Arms: John Neal Fireman. Second class: Charles Rice. Seaman: James Roberts. Out of the 9, only 2, Rice and Conlon, were born in the United States. They were young, between 23 and 31 years old, and they had just taken part in one of the most daring missions of the Civil War. Their medals were awarded on May 12, 1865, aboard the newly repaired USS Agawam. Fort Fisher falls. The war ends. The first battle may have been a failure, but the war wasn't over. Just a few weeks later, in mid-January 1865, the Union launched a second assault on Fort Fisher, this time with more firepower and better planning. This time, they won. With Fort Fisher captured, the Confederacy was completely cut off from the outside world. No more supplies, no more trade. It was the beginning of the end. 3 months later, the Civil War was over, a legacy of valor. The USS Agawam's men didn't take the fort. Their mission was a failure. But their courage? That's what mattered. They proved that heroism isn't just about victory. It's about stepping forward, even when the odds are stacked against you. And for that, they earned their place in history. Bravery isn't measured by success. It's measured by the willingness to stand when others won't. 9 men stood, and for that, they became legends.